Hello, everyone. My name is Anne, and our action group on resourcing youth action will be sharing what we were able to come up with during the 2 weeks of the big brainstorm. But before we do that, I'd like to hand it over to Shagan, who is going to take us through a poem that we were able to co-create as a group, and it's about the future of youth funding. Over to you, Shagan.
Thank you, Anne. The future of youth funding makes me feel anxious. The future of youth funding makes me feel ambivalent. The future of youth funding makes me feel anxious and hopeful at the same time. The future of youth funding makes me feel threads of hope and glimmers of light. The future of youth funding makes me feel concerned yet hopeful. The future of youth funding makes me feel challenged and inspired, as if I was looking at the sea. The future of youth funding makes me feel optimistic. The future of youth funding makes me feel hopeful and empowered. The future of youth funding makes me uncertain. The future of youth funding must be equitable, inclusive to all minorities.
All right, thank you so much, Shagan, and I hope that we all enjoyed the poem, and I hope that we can also relate to either one or two statements from that poem. So now, why is resourcing youth action actually an important issue? So according to our research, youth civil societies are not thriving, and in many cases, not even surviving. And the biggest challenge is actually resourcing and majorly funding. So repeated resourcing challenges include burdensome donor requirements, where the donors are actually asking for more than they're willing to provide in terms of financial support or any other form of support. Then we have inflexible top-down funding models that are actually, this refers to very restrictive funding that does not allow for innovation. And then we have lack of trust. And this is one of the biggest problems that exists between donors and the youth civil societies. And it has actually led to the donors not trusting the young people enough to an extent of giving them very limited funding and also very little funding as compared to other organizations that have well-established structures. And then we also have unrealistic application processes, which tend to be very tiresome and burdensome. You can imagine where a situation where youth civil societies are actually asked, to submit so many documents or to write very lengthy essays at the start of the application process, whereas most of them never even get past the first stage of the selection process, which is the long listing. And so what are we looking forward to achieve as a group? So we want to break down barriers between youth and funders and together build a more equitable and accountable funding ecosystem. Over to you, Freya.
Great, thanks, Anne. So after exploring different research, resources and reports over these past 2 weeks, and also sharing our different experiences and challenges around funding and resourcing, we spent some time building out our bold ambition of what we want for the future of resourcing youth action. And as one member of our group pointed out, it's actually not just about the future, but it's really starting with the now. And we did this by imagining headlines for newspaper and what we would want to see on these front pages if our resourcing priorities are to be properly addressed. And on the slide, you can see two colourful examples of some of these newspaper front pages that came from our action group. So through this activity, as a group, we established some of our common and big priorities that I'm now going to share with you. So firstly, youth-led funds came up a lot in our discussion, this opportunity for young people to co-design and administer youth funds that are by and for youth. And these funds would offer multi-year, more flexible funding with simplified application processes and monitoring systems. And one member of our action group came up with the idea of having a young girls feminist leadership fund that will be available to all girls around the world. Our second area was around inclusion, and we talked a lot about the importance of inclusion when it comes to resourcing, ensuring that no one gets left behind by co-creating funding opportunities that actually really respond to the diverse needs and interests of young people. So it's really important to ensure that there is a role for different and diverse groups to shape different funding models, because they know better than anyone else the kinds of resources that they will need for the work they want to do. Another area was access to information, and a number of our action group called for establishing better and simplified access to information around funding opportunities. There were some very practical suggestions that perhaps donors could provide training in advance of opportunities being released to kind of support young people to access those donor funds, to write those applications. And we definitely see an opportunity here to make better use of technology to ensure those two-way flows of information between young people and different funders. Another area that we talked a lot about was around breaking down mistrust. And if we all agreed that better resourcing isn't just about providing money, it's also about those stronger relationships. It's about communication. It's about partnerships with young people through those funding opportunities. So by really investing in these relationships, we think that donors will start to gain more trust and understanding of youth incentives and the different priorities. And then last, but definitely not least, another big area that came through was around bigger intergenerational impact. And we have all seen over these past few years how young people have been at the forefront of the COVID response, and they are so often at the forefront in their communities when it comes to driving forward sustainable development. So partnering with young people and youth organisations to design and deliver funding is proven to deliver stronger development outcomes time and time again. So young people have the skills and networks to take actions and to take programmes to scale, and ultimately ensure a big impact, than often bigger, more bureaucratic organisations or partnerships. Over to you, Elisa.
Seems that we're run out of time, but just the next steps, we're building a coalition and continue nurturing it. I'll just gonna paste now on the chat box the next steps and inviting you all to join and continue this conversation on resourcing youth action. Thank you so much.